The sun was blazing high above the city, turning the glass panels of the Grand Horizon Hotel into giant mirrors that reflected the busy streets below. Inside the lobby, the air was cool and smelled like expensive coffee and fresh flowers. This was a place for people who had important meetings, wearing shiny shoes and carrying leather briefcases. It was not usually a place for quiet moments, but for Julian, today was different. Julian was a man who had everything the world said you should want. He was a millionaire, a pianist who had played in the biggest concert halls on earth. He was famous for his hands, for the way they could dance across the keys and make people weep. But lately, Julian felt tired. The fame felt heavy, like a coat that was too tight. He had finished a business lunch in one of the private rooms upstairs and needed to escape. He didn't want to sign autographs. He didn't want to talk about stocks or his next tour. He just wanted to breathe. Instead of taking the main exit where the taxis were honking, Julian turned a corner and found a soft, velvet chair tucked away behind a large, leafy fern. From here, he could see the whole lobby without being seen. He sank into the chair, loosened his tie, and let out a long breath. He watched the people hurrying past. He saw a couple checking their phones, a bellhop carrying a mountain of luggage, and a woman tapping her foot impatiently. It was the usual noise of life. Then, a different sound drifted through the air. It wasn't the sound of the jazz band that played on the stage near the bar. It was a simple, single note. Then another. It was coming from the far corner of the lobby, near an old, upright piano that sat against the wall. This piano wasn't like the grand ones Julian played at concerts. It was smaller, the wood was scratched, and it looked like it was mostly used for holding flower pots. But someone was sitting on the bench. Julian leaned forward, parting the large leaves of the fern to get a better look. It was a young girl. She looked very small sitting on the wide bench. Her sneakers were worn out, and her jeans had a hole in one knee. She had a messy ponytail that stuck out in all directions. But what caught Julian's attention wasn't her clothes. It was the way she sat. She wasn't slouching like a bored kid. She was perfectly still, her body turned slightly toward the keyboard. She reached out a hand and pressed a key. A low, deep note rang out. She didn't pull her hand away. She kept her finger on the key, feeling the vibration humming through the wood. Then, she pressed another key, high up on the right side. A bright, piercing sound answered. She tilted her head to the side, listening as if the two notes were having a conversation. Julian frowned slightly. He was a professional. He knew music theory, structure, and rhythm. This girl was doing none of that. She was just wandering. But there was something strange about it. Usually, when children bang on a piano in a lobby, it's loud and annoying. People glare, and parents rush over to stop them. But this girl was gentle. She treated the keys like they were fragile little birds. She began to hum. It wasn't a song Julian recognized. It was just a low, steady hum that matched the way she was rocking back and forth. Then, her left hand found a cluster of notes dark and cloudy. Her right hand skipped over a few white notes light and sunny. She seemed to be looking for something. Julian noticed a white cane leaning against the piano bench, propped up carefully so it wouldn't fall. His eyes widened. He looked back at the girl's face. Her eyes were open, but they didn't focus on the keys. They didn't focus on the people walking by. They stared straight ahead, looking at nothing but seeing everything. She was blind. A businessman walked right past her, talking loudly on his phone, ignoring her completely. A group of tourists taking selfies didn't even glance her way. She was invisible to the busy world. In this giant, expensive hotel filled with rich and important people, this blind girl was exploring a dusty old piano all by herself. Julian felt a pull in his chest, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. He forgot about his tiredness. He forgot about his money. He just watched. The girl stopped playing for a moment and ran her fingers over the wood of the piano lid. She traced the grain, feeling the bumps and the scratches. It was like she was reading a story with her fingertips. Then, she put her hands back on the keys. This time, she tried to play 2 notes at once. It sounded clunky and wrong. She stopped, shook her head, and laughed softly to herself. It wasn't a frustrated laugh. It was a sound of pure discovery. She tried again, shifting her wrist, and this time the 2 notes sang together in harmony. "There," she whispered softly, so quietly that Julian almost didn't hear it. "That's the color blue." Julian raised an eyebrow. Blue, that was a major chord, happy and bright. To him, it sounded like sunlight. But to her, it was blue. He realized that she wasn't just trying to make music. She was trying to translate the world into sound. She was painting pictures with notes. He watched her hand hover over the keys, hesitation in her fingers before they landed. She wasn't thinking about what was correct. She wasn't worried about hitting a wrong note. She was purely focused on the sound, the touch, and the feeling. It was raw. It was honest. It was the complete opposite of the perfect, rehearsed performances Julian gave every night. Around her, the lobby continued its chaotic rush. A cart rolled by with a clatter. A phone pinged with a sharp notification sound. A baby cried in the distance. But the girl stayed in her own bubble of concentration. She was searching for a melody that didn't exist yet, trying to catch a sound that was floating in the air. Julian stood up. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do. He knew he shouldn't just walk away. He had spent his whole life surrounded by talented people, but this was different. This was a gift that hadn't been polished by teachers or crushed by critics. It was a wild, natural thing growing in the middle of a marble floor. He smoothed down his jacket and stepped out from behind the fern. The distance between them felt short, but he walked slowly, not wanting to startle her. He saw her back stiffen slightly as his shadow fell over the piano keys. She stopped her humming. She turned her face toward him, her eyes wide and unseeing, her expression alert like a small animal sensing a change in the wind. The air between them felt suddenly quiet, even though the lobby was as loud as ever. Julian looked down at the girl, and the girl looked in his direction, waiting. The worn-out piano sat between them, a bridge of old wood and wire connecting 2 very different worlds. The girl froze when the shadow fell across the keys. Her hands pulled back slightly, hovering in the air like nervous birds. She turned her face toward the sound of footsteps, her expression shifting from curiosity to sudden alertness. For a blind person, the world is defined by sound and movement, and she could tell someone was standing very close. Julian stopped a few feet away. He realized that to a stranger, a man in an expensive suit standing silently might look threatening. He softened his posture, rolling his shoulders back to appear less tall, less imposing. He didn't want to scare her. He just wanted to connect. "Hello," Julian said. His voice was low and calm, cutting through the noise of the lobby without being loud. The girl tilted her head, listening. She relaxed a little when she heard the gentle tone in his voice. "Hello," she whispered back. Her voice was quiet, small against the high ceiling of the hotel. "I hope I didn't interrupt you," Julian said, taking another small step forward. He kept his hands visible by his sides. "I was sitting over there, behind the plants. I heard you playing." The girl's cheeks turned a little pink. She looked down at her lap, her fingers twisting together. "I wasn't really playing a song," she mumbled. "I was just listening." "That sounded nice to me," Julian said honestly. "Listening is the most important part of music. Most people forget that." He looked at the piano bench. It was a wide bench, with enough room for two people, but the girl was sitting right in the middle. "Do you mind if I come closer?" Julian asked. "I promise I'm not a security guard coming to tell you to stop." The girl let out a tiny laugh. It was a relieved sound. "Okay. You can come closer." Julian walked up to the piano and stood beside the bench. He looked at the old keys. They were yellowing with age, and some were chipped. It was a far cry from the pristine, gleaming Steinways he was used to playing on stage. But looking at this girl, he felt a strange respect for this old instrument. It was her voice. "I'm a pianist too," Julian said. The girl's head snapped up. Her unseeing eyes widened. "Really, like a real one?" Julian smiled. "Yes, a real one. I play concerts. Sometimes in big halls with thousands of people." "Wow," she breathed out. She reached out and touched the side of the piano, feeling the smooth wood. "I bet you play on huge pianos. The ones that sound like thunder." "Sometimes," Julian said. "But big pianos aren't always the best ones. Sometimes, the small ones have more heart." He gestured toward the empty space on the bench. "Would it be all right if I sat down for a minute? My feet are tired from walking around in these fancy shoes." The girl scooted over immediately. She made room for him without hesitation. "You can sit here. It's not very soft, though." Julian sat down. The bench was hard, and it creaked under his weight, but he didn't mind. He was now shoulder to shoulder with this young stranger. He could smell the fabric of her clothes, clean cotton and fresh air. Up close, she seemed even smaller. Her hands, resting in her lap, were delicate and thin. "I'm Julian," he said gently. "I'm Lily," she replied. "Nice to meet you, Lily." "Now, I have a question," Julian said, leaning in slightly like he was sharing a secret. "I heard you playing those notes a minute ago. The ones you said were blue. Do you play here often?" Lily shook her head. "No, I just come when my mom is having coffee in the shop next door. She thinks I'm sitting on the chairs reading my Braille book, but I like to come here and listen to the piano. I don't know how to play real songs. I just like to see what the keys feel like." "They felt good today?" Julian asked. "Mostly," Lily said. "Except for the middle ones. They felt sticky. Like they had honey on them." Julian pressed one of the middle keys. It made a dull thud. "You're right. It is sticky. But you made it sound good anyway." He placed his hands on the keyboard. His fingers were long and elegant, shaped by decades of practice. Lily looked down at his hands, though she couldn't see them clearly. She could sense the size of them. They felt large and capable next to hers. "Can we try something, Lily?" Julian asked. "Just for fun. No pressure. No right or wrong way." "What is it?" she asked, turning her face toward him. "I want to play with you," Julian said. "I'll play some sounds, and you play some sounds. We don't need a song." We just talk to each other with the piano. Lily hesitated. She bit her lip. I don't know how. I might mess it up. There are no mistakes here, Julian promised. That's the rule. If you hit a wrong note, it just means you're starting a new conversation. He didn't wait for her to agree. He didn't want her to overthink it and get nervous. He gently pressed a low C note on the far left side of the keyboard. It was a deep, warm sound, like a foundation being poured. He held it, letting the sound fill the air around them. Lily's hand twitched. She heard the low note. It felt solid. It felt safe. Without saying a word, she lifted her right hand and tapped a high E note. It was bright, like a spark of light. Julian smiled. Perfect. A fifth interval. It was open and hopeful. He played a chord next, rolling his fingers slowly so the notes bloomed one after another. Lily listened. She didn't try to copy him. Instead, she tapped a rhythm with her thumb. It was a heartbeat sound. Thump thump, thump thump. Julian picked up that heartbeat. He played it on his side of the piano, a steady bass line. He was walking her through a musical garden, showing her that he was there to support her sound. See, Julian whispered, leaning close so only she could hear. We're talking. Lily's face changed. The tension left her forehead. Her shoulders dropped. She wasn't scared anymore. She realized that the man beside her wasn't judging her. He was listening to her. He was giving her space. She started to move her hands more freely. She played a handful of notes, a little cluster that sounded like raindrops hitting a window. Julian answered her with a soft, sweeping melody that wrapped around her raindrops. It was simple, but it was beautiful. The contrast between his trained, smooth touch and her raw, experimental touch created something magical. The people walking past in the lobby began to slow down. They noticed the man in the expensive suit and the little girl sitting together. They saw the way Julian leaned toward her, the way he nodded encouragingly every time she touched a key. Just for fun, Julian murmured, reminding her of the promise. Just listen to the colors. Lily smiled, a genuine, beaming smile that lit up her face. She reached over and found his hand on the keys, not to move it, but just to rest her fingers next to his for a second. It was a silent thank you. Then, she pulled her hand back and played a loud, joyous chord. Julian laughed out loud. It was a sound of pure delight. He matched her energy, his fingers flying across the keys to match her joy. They were playing just for fun, but to anyone listening, it sounded like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. The connection between them was like an invisible wire, humming with energy. Julian felt a thrill he hadn't experienced in years. On stage, he knew exactly what note would come next. He followed a script, a strict path written by composers who died centuries ago. But sitting next to Lily, he had no idea what was going to happen. She was the one leading the dance now. Julian decided to challenge her just a little bit. He kept his left hand playing that steady, heartbeat rhythm, anchoring them both to the ground. With his right hand, he began to play a bouncy, playful tune. It was light and teasing, like a cat pawing at a ball of yarn. He moved his fingers quickly, skipping up the scale and then sliding back down. Lily reacted instantly. Her head snapped toward the sound, a grin spreading across her face. She understood the game. He was teasing her, and she wanted to answer back. She lifted her hands and slammed down 3 keys in the middle register. It wasn't a smooth chord, it was jagged and loud, like a shout of laughter. Julian didn't miss a beat. He took her jagged chord and turned it into something jazzy. He twisted the melody, mimicking the sound of a surprise, weaving her shout into his own playing. He was proving to her that even the rough sounds could fit into the music. "You're fast," Lily giggled, her hands hovering over the keys. "Try to catch me," Julian whispered, his eyes shining. He played a run of notes that rushed upward like a wave climbing the beach. Lily squeaked and scrambled to find the high notes. She wasn't looking for the right fingers, she was just reaching for the sound. She smacked a high C that rang out clear and true. It wasn't perfectly timed with Julian, but the collision of their sounds created a crunchy, pleasant dissonance, a clashing that somehow sounded right. To anyone watching, it was a strange sight. A world-famous pianist in a tailored suit hunched over a battered hotel piano, his face filled with the delight of a child, while a small blind girl banged away beside him with total abandon. They weren't performing for an audience. They were having a conversation, a debate, a game of tag. Julian decided to speed up. He tapped his foot on the floor, signaling a faster pace. He played a rhythm that was urgent and driving. Da-da-dum, da-da-dum. Lily caught on immediately. She wasn't classically trained, she didn't know about time signatures or keeping a steady beat, but she had an incredible sense of intuition. Instead of trying to match his rhythm exactly, she played against it. She played long, slow notes that stretched out while he played fast, short ones. It was like the difference between a rushing river and a floating cloud. The contrast made the music feel huge. Suddenly, Lily's hand slipped. Her palm landed on a row of accidental black keys, creating a messy, discordant noise. A mistake. A crash. Most people would have stopped. They would have apologized or pulled their hands back in embarrassment. But Lily didn't hesitate. She didn't see it as a mistake. To her, it was just another sound. Julian watched, fascinated. Before the sound of the crash even faded, Lily twisted her wrist. She took that messy jumble of notes and slid her hand slowly down to the white keys, resolving the tension. She turned the mistake into a question, and then answered it with a soft, mournful melody. Julian felt goosebumps rise on his arms. That was jazz. That was pure improvisation. That was a skill that took most musicians years of sleepless nights to learn. She had done it because she felt it, not because she was taught it. He stopped playing for a moment, letting her melody hang in the air. The lobby around them seemed to fade away. The clinking of coffee cups, the ring of elevators, the murmur of voices, it all turned into background noise. The only thing that mattered was the space between them. "You turned that crash into gold," Julian said softly, so only she could hear. Lily shrugged, her face turning pink again. "It just sounded like the sky falling," she said simply. "So I wanted to catch it." Julian looked at her. He had played in front of presidents and royalty. He had received standing ovations in sold-out arenas. But none of those moments felt as significant as this small girl explaining how she caught the falling sky with her fingertips. He realized then that Lily didn't play with her hands. She played with her entire being. She listened with her skin. The vibrations of the piano traveled up her arms, into her chest, and resonated inside her. She felt the music as a physical thing, like warmth or cold. "Let's try something else," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to hear you sing with the piano. Not words. Just feelings." He began to play very softly. He played chords that were warm and fuzzy, like a thick blanket on a cold night. He left gaps in the music, pauses of silence, inviting her to fill them. Lily took a deep breath. She closed her eyes, even though there was no light to block out. She swayed slightly. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play a single, high note. She held it, letting it ring out. Then, she moved her finger just a half step up, making the sound strain and yearn. It was a sound of longing. It was a sound that said, I am here, but I want to be there. Julian harmonized with her, adding a deep, supportive bass note that made her high note sound even more lonely and beautiful. They were painting a picture together, a landscape of sound that had no shape but felt full of color. The people passing by were stopping now. A small crowd had begun to form near the marble pillars. They weren't looking at their phones anymore. They were looking at the pianist and the girl. They sensed that something special was happening. It wasn't just a song, it was a moment of pure connection. It was a master and a student, or perhaps two masters, speaking a language that had no words. Lily was beaming. She could feel the energy of the room shifting. She could feel the silence of the crowd pressing in on them, but it didn't scare her. She knew she was safe next to Julian. She felt his presence like a shield. She played a fast trill, a run of notes that sounded like a bird taking flight. Julian matched her, climbing the scale with her. They reached the top of the keyboard together, their hands bumping gently. For a second, their fingers touched his weathered and experienced, hers small and smooth. They paused there, at the top of the musical mountain, holding the breath of the room. Are you having fun? Julian asked, a smile in his voice. The most fun ever, Lily breathed. Good, Julian said. Then hang on, we're going to fly down. And together, they raced their hands down the keys, a cascading waterfall of sound that ended in a deep, resonant chord that shook the floorboards. The silence that followed was heavy, electric, and alive. The final notes of their playful tumble faded into the air, leaving a hum that seemed to vibrate against the high ceiling of the lobby. Julian sat back, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his chest rising and falling a bit faster than usual. He was grinning, a genuine, boyish smile that few people ever got to see. He looked at Lily, expecting her to be bouncing with excitement or asking to play another fast game. But Lily was very still. The adrenaline from the flying down the keys seemed to have drained away, leaving something heavier in its place. She sat with her back straight, her hands resting in her lap, fingers interlaced tightly. Her face was turned toward the piano, but her unseeing eyes were distant, as if she was looking through the wood and the wall, into a place only she could see. Julian watched her closely. He had played with thousands of musicians over the years. He knew how to read a room. He knew how to read body language. And right now, Lily's body was telling him that the game was over, but the music wasn't done. He waited. He didn't rush her. In a world that always wanted to go faster, Julian chose to be slow. He let the silence stretch between them. It wasn't an awkward silence, it was a listening silence. He could hear the air conditioner humming above them. He could hear the distant murmur of a coffee machine. But mostly, he heard Lily breathing. What are you hearing now, Lily? Julian asked gently. He didn't want to break the spell, but he wanted to know where she was going. Lily took a deep breath. She let it out slowly, her small shoulders dropping. It's quiet now, she whispered. The colors are dark. She lifted her hands and placed them back on the keys. She didn't play the playful bird sounds from before. She didn't play the happy raindrops. She pressed down on 3 low notes. They were dissonant, clashing against each other in a way that made the stomach ache. Is that sad? Julian asked softly. No, Lily said, shaking her head slowly. It's not sad. It's just, missing. It's looking for something. She began to play. It wasn't a melody that you could hum along to. It was a wandering line. Her right hand moved slowly, climbing up a few steps and then sliding back down, like a person walking up a hill in the fog, unsure of where the top is. The sound was thin and lonely. Julian felt a tightness in his throat. He recognized that feeling. It was the feeling of being in a room full of people and still feeling entirely alone. It was the feeling of wanting to connect but not knowing how. He was amazed that she could express such a complex emotion without saying a single word. Lily played a phrase that ended on a high note, hanging there, unresolved. It sounded like a question asked into an empty room. Is anybody there? Julian wanted to answer her. He wanted to jump in and play a comforting chord, to wrap her sound in warmth and tell her everything would be okay. But his hands stayed frozen. He realized that would be the wrong thing to do. This wasn't the time for him to be the rescuer. This was her story. She needed to speak it. If he played now, he would be interrupting her voice. So, he did the hardest thing a musician can do. He stopped playing completely. He pulled his hands away from the keys and rested them on the bench. The lobby, which had been full of movement just moments ago, seemed to stop. The people who had been walking past began to pause. The small crowd that had gathered near the pillars grew quiet. They sensed the change. The playful energy was gone, replaced by something intense. It was like watching a storm cloud gather on the horizon, frightening but beautiful. Lily didn't notice the crowd. She was in her own world. She leaned into the music, her body swaying. She started to play with both hands. Her left hand kept a steady, low pulse, slow and heavy, like a heartbeat slowing down. Her right hand wove a melody that was intricate and delicate. It was a sound of deep longing. It sounded like a mother humming a lullaby to a child who isn't there. It sounded like an old man remembering a summer from 50 years ago. The music was full of a sorrow that was too big for a 10-year-old girl to carry, yet she held it effortlessly. Julian watched her fingers. They weren't hitting the keys hard. She was stroking them, caressing the sound out of the instrument. She was treating every note like it was precious. There were no mistakes now. Every note belonged exactly where it was. The music began to build. It wasn't getting faster, it was getting thicker. Lily added more notes to the chords, creating a rich, dark fabric of sound. The tension in the lobby grew. People stopped looking at their phones completely. A businessman in a gray suit lowered his briefcase to the floor, his eyes fixed on the small girl. A woman holding a toddler brought a hand up to her mouth, her eyes glistening. They weren't just hearing a song. They were witnessing a soul opening up. Lily's music swelled, climbing toward a peak. It was a cry from the heart, pure and unfiltered. It was the sound of every person who had ever felt invisible, reaching out and screaming to be seen. It was raw and honest. It hurt to listen to, but it was impossible to look away. Then, just as the sound was about to become too heavy to bear, Lily changed it. She shifted her hands. The dissonance melted away. She found a major chord. But it wasn't a happy major chord. It was a peaceful one. It was the sound of acceptance. The melody slowed down, drifting like a feather falling to the ground. She played a sequence of notes that descended slowly, step by step, until she reached the very bottom of the piano. She struck the lowest A key gently. Then, She reached up with her pinky and played the very highest A. The distance between the two notes was massive. It spanned the entire range of human hearing. Silence rushed back into the space. Lily lifted her hands off the keys and let them fall into her lap. She took a shuddering breath and sat still. The vibrations of the last high note were still fading, ghost-like, in the air. Julian sat frozen. He had played on the greatest stages in the world. He had played with orchestras that consisted of 100 people. But he had never heard anything like that. It wasn't about technique. It wasn't about speed. It was about the truth. This girl had taken a feeling that had no words and turned it into sound. She had opened her chest and shown everyone inside. He looked at the crowd. They were staring, some with their mouths open, others with tears running down their faces. The hotel manager, who usually rushed to tell people to move along, stood perfectly still behind the front desk, his eyes wide. The silence stretched on. No one wanted to break it. No one wanted to be the first to make a noise, because it felt like the music was still hanging there, invisible, waiting to be heard. It was a profound moment. A blind girl, sitting at a broken piano, had just brought a room full of strangers to a standstill with nothing but her heart and her hands. For a long moment, the only sound in the massive lobby was the hum of the ice machine behind the bar and the distant, muffled ding of an elevator. The silence was heavy. It wasn't an empty silence, it was full. It felt like the air was holding its breath, waiting to see if the magic would vanish or if it was real. Lily sat with her hands in her lap, her head bowed. She seemed to shrink back into herself, the confidence she had while playing fading away. She looked small again, just a little girl on a hard bench. She twisted her fingers together, perhaps realizing that the room had gone quiet. She looked nervous, unsure of how people would react to her outpouring of emotion. Then, a single clap came from the back of the crowd. It was sharp and loud. Then another. And another. It wasn't the slow, polite applause that people give out of obligation. It started as a rumble and then exploded into a wave of sound. It wasn't just clapping, people were cheering. A man in a business suit wiped his eyes with a handkerchief and shouted, "Bravo!" A woman holding a coffee cup was clapping so hard her drink was spilling onto the floor, but she didn't care. The bellhop stood near the marble columns, his arms crossed, smiling broadly. The sound washed over Lily like a warm breeze. She flinched slightly at the volume, her hands flying up to cover her ears for a second, but then a smile broke across her face. It was a surprised smile, the kind that shows you didn't know you were capable of making people feel this way. Julian sat beside her, letting the noise wash over them too. He looked at the people, their faces glowing, their phones lowered and forgotten. He saw the genuine emotion etched on their faces. They weren't clapping for a millionaire celebrity. They were clapping for the truth. They were clapping because for 3 minutes, they had felt something real in a plastic world. He looked back at Lily. The applause was loud, echoing off the glass walls, but she looked a bit overwhelmed. She was turning her head blindly, trying to understand where all the love was coming from. Julian knew what he had to do. He didn't want to just sit there and share the moment. He wanted to give it to her. He stood up slowly. The movement caught the attention of the crowd, and their clapping faltered for a second, wondering what the famous pianist was going to do. He didn't bow. He didn't take a bow for himself. Instead, he reached down and gently took Lily's hand. Her hand was small and warm, trembling just a little. He lifted it up, high above her head. "She is the artist," Julian said, his voice ringing out clear and strong, cutting through the applause. I was just listening. The crowd went wild. The cheering got louder. A few people whistled. They directed their energy right at Lily. Julian could feel her hand relax in his as she realized what was happening. She wasn't the sidekick, she was the star. He held her hand there, firm and proud, making sure everyone knew exactly where the music had come from. Lily's face turned a deep shade of red, but she was grinning from ear to ear. She sat up straighter, her chest puffed out. For the first time, she didn't feel like the blind girl who sat on the sidelines. She felt like a queen. Slowly, the noise began to quiet down again. People didn't want to leave, but the moment had peaked. Julian lowered Lily's hand but didn't let it go immediately. He squeezed it gently. "Did you hear that?" he asked, leaning down close to her ear so she could hear him over the fading noise. "I felt it," Lily said, her voice vibrating. "It felt like a big warm blanket." "You did that," Julian said. "You gave them that feeling. They came here for coffee or business meetings, worried about their taxes or their emails. You made them stop. You made them feel." "I was just playing what was in my head," she said, shy again. "That is the most important thing there is," Julian told her. "Most people spend their whole lives hiding what is in their heads. You let it out." He looked at the old, scratched piano. Then he looked at the crowd starting to disperse, many of them stopping to look at Lily with awe as they walked back to their lives. Julian thought about his own life. He thought about the cold, empty mansions he owned and the awards gathering dust on shelves. He thought about the thousands of people who cheered for him because they knew his name, not because they felt his heart. Sitting next to Lily, he realized that somewhere along the way, he had forgotten why he started playing music in the first place. It wasn't to be famous. It was to connect. It was to make people feel less alone. Lily had reminded him of that. She had more talent in her small, wandering hands than he had in his entire disciplined body. And the world deserved to hear it. Not just in a hotel lobby. Everywhere. He knelt down on one knee so he was level with her face. He reached out and touched her shoulder. "Lily," he said seriously. "I know a lot about music. I know teachers who can help you. I know pianos that sing better than this one." Lily's smile faltered a little. "I don't have money for lessons," she whispered. "My mom says we have to be careful." "Forget about money," Julian said firmly. "That doesn't matter here. You have a gift, Lily. A real, true gift. If you want to, I would like to help you show it to the world. Not for fun this time. For real." Lily's eyes widened, though she couldn't see him. She reached out and found his face, her fingers touching his cheek to make sure he was really there. "Really, you want to help me?" "I do," Julian said. "But only if you promise to keep playing those blue notes. And the sky falling notes. Don't let anyone make you play the right way. You play your way." "I promise," Lily said. Her voice was full of wonder. The hotel lobby was settling back into its normal rhythm, but the air felt different. It felt lighter. "Come on," Julian said, standing up and keeping hold of her hand. "Let's go find your mom. I think she needs to hear what you just did, and I have some things I want to tell her." Lily slid off the bench, grabbing her white cane with her free hand. She stood up tall beside Julian. She didn't look like a lost little girl anymore. She looked like a musician. As they walked away from the piano, leaving the old instrument sitting silently against the wall. The people they passed smiled at them. They didn't see a blind girl and a rich man. They saw two friends walking toward a new beginning. And as Julian looked down at her, he knew that this was the best duet he had ever played. The music had stopped, but the song was just beginning.